Mr. Speaker, things may not be going very well in Iraq, but we think that it's too premature to decide its fate, and we think things can improve and more long-term harms that will result from this policy than benefits. And that's why we think the status quo should stand. We think the federal structure, which is the status quo, is still the best option. So let's go into what she argued. She argued primarily that people in Iraq don't trust each other very much. To that, I've got two main responses. The first thing is that we don't think they're really going to help anything or help with that problem with the policy. Why is that so? Because she seems to believe that the Shiites, the Kurds, and the Sunnis as well are all homogeneous groups within which there are no differences. We will argue there are still differences that occur even between these groups. For example, between Kurds, you've got different tribal factions that are there. And if your policy doesn't teach people on the ground to learn how to get along despite their differences, then even when you split it up into different states, you're still going to have the same amount of distrust occurring later on in just different forms. Maybe that's why the policy doesn't actually help anything in the long run. Yeah. Secondly, we don't think she showed to us how the status quo isn't really working at all. Because we will argue firstly it's premature to evaluate Iraq. It's only been a few years since the actual invasion that led to the Iraq of today. But secondly, there are signs of progress. Look, in fact, we've had two presidential elections, so two national elections that have been held successfully over the past 5 years. And we had a huge turnout among Iraqi voters, with more than 80% people taking out the polls. That shows people do have faith in democracy. People are interested in working together. Furthermore, violence has reduced drastically in many parts of the area. And lastly, there's been a setup of a national Iraqi police force which puts together people from all walks of life, from all backgrounds. We will see that shows progress is being made. And furthermore, we argue, the Speaker, that time will eventually heal all wounds. Just like how Singapore managed to deal with the differences that occurred between the Chinese and Malays through time and through national integration policies, we think the same success can be achieved here with Iraq, given enough time and given that the people are exposed to dealing with one another, allowing to resolve the disputes openly through discourse, not through violence. And that's what we say we think that the status quo is fine. But before I go on to my main substantive, yes, Joshua.
Considering now that they are already fighting and they're really causing problems among each other, how can you let that continue in a country as separatist as Iraq?
We will argue, firstly, if you're talking about violence, I've already dealt with my POI, and I told you that the violence is really being perpetrated mainly by the few insurgents out there. We don't think the average Iraqi Sunni person who goes to the shop every day also has got an AK-47 hidden in his bag and wishes to go out and people. That's not who the people are. The main culprits are the extremist groups in their small numbers, and they're going to exist anyway. And secondly, dealing with them is far more effective than trying to separate a whole country. I think that's what we're already doing right now, effectively with the setup of the National Police Force and also with the presence of American forces and the like. So let's go into a few points of substantive. We think that the long-term harms that could result from this policy far outweigh any benefits that they could derive. What are the harms? But the first thing is that you haven't dealt with the fact that the resources that people are currently fighting over have not been resolved amicably, and thus we say there will still be issues over how oil will be shared among the different people, and this will lead to two harms. A, you're going to exacerbate instability in the region, and you see this is harmful and this will cause harmful problems in the long run. And secondly, you're going to actually intensify ethnic violence. So let's look firstly at oil. We say that the main reason that the people right now in Iraq still haven't been able to get along really well is because they don't trust each other over the way the oil in Iraq will be shared. This makes sense because Iraq right now has got nothing really they can use to generate wealth for its people. It's only got oil. And the problem with Iraq is that most of the oil is actually only found in a few places. It's found, like the bulk of the oil is located in an area called Kirkuk, which is near the Kurdish part of Iraq. And we will argue, the Speaker, that with the physical separation of Iraq into three different states, we're going to create even more distrust between those people. Because you've not shown us in a policy how exactly you're going to talk about how you're going to deal with the distribution of oil wealth under your paradigm. There's no mention of it in the policy. It's probable that they're going to leave the oil to whoever manages to get it physically. That causes harm. But even if we manage to find a way to share the oil, equitably through some kind of transnational agreement, we say disruption will still occur because now the people who are living far away from that particular oil region won't have any more physical jurisdiction over that land, and thus the disruption will still occur. This is harmful. What are harms then? You see, you're going to exacerbate instability in the region. This makes sense because you're going to create now 3 different states who are hostile to each other. And this makes sense particularly because they've not shown to you in the policy how they're going to get people to learn to get along despite the differences. So you're going to concede the fact that they can't get along very well. You're going to split them up and then have resulting 3 different states who are hostile to one another. This is harmful. Why is that so? Because the separation will lead to distinct national identities based on racial lines. This makes sense. You're also going to have a Kurdish state which will have a very strong Kurdish national identity. You're going to have a Sunni state which will obviously have a very Sunni national identity. And the same for the Shiites. We say firstly A, that you're going to create long-term tension within 3 different states. But secondly, you argue, you're going to encourage neighboring countries to actually interfere in the politics of that area. It makes sense. But look at who's around. You've got Saudi Arabia, which is a Sunni majority country, who's more than happy to help his Sunni brothers whenever they feel that they're being oppressed. You've got Iran, a Shiite majority country who are willing to interfere, and they've already done so actually in the past 1 or 2 years, and has been told off by America. You have the PKK in Turkey, an extremist group which believes in Kurdish nationalism. We say that they're going to interfere and cause more harm, and thus there'll be greater violence actually occur on the ground, and this argument doesn't make sense. We say it's better to stick to the status quo, but you try to get the people to learn to get along. And eventually we argue democracy will do its magic and people will get along, and that's how you reduce instability in the long run. Secondly, we argue the speakers that you're going to encourage increase amounts of ethnic violence. This makes sense because now with the splitting of Iraq into distinct states based on racial lines, this will increase the hostilities that minorities within those states will now receive. Because we don't be a policy to have a perfect movement of people. You're not going to get all the Sunnis going to one area. There's going to be a few Sunni people living as a minority in the new Kurdish state, for example. You're going to have some Shia people living as a minority in the new Sunni state, for example. Maybe argue you're going to increase the kind of violence that they will face in their day-to-day lives. Because this is harmful to them. This is really, really wrong. So in summary, Mr. Speaker, I've shown to you that they're not dealt with Iraq at all. They're not shown a way to deal with the problems. And secondly, they're going to have long-term harms that will outweigh any benefits that will derive. And for all these reasons, we beg to oppose.